thank you for joining us for our first ever Facebook Live event, a panel discussion regarding sexual assault. And so we have some great agencies here with us today. I'm going to have each of these lovely ladies introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their agencies and who they work for. Before that, I just want to let you know that my name is Jessica DeRoche. I am the Senior Director of the Firemount Campus and the Denton Exchange Campus for North Central Texas College. And I will be your moderator for this evening. So Ginger, do you want to introduce yourself and your organization?
Sure. Excuse me. My name is Ginger Johnson. I'm the Executive Director for Abigails Arms. We are the family crisis center that is located in Gainesville, Texas. We provide services to victims of family violence, sexual assault, child-specific trauma, and basically victims of crime in Cook County.
Great, thank you. Hillary? You're muted. Oh, Hillary, you're muted. There you go.
My name is Hillary Hightower. I am the Director of Prevention, Education, and Awareness at Denton County Friends of the Family. We are the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Crisis Center for Denton County, the sole provider of free services for victims and their children. And we also have a prevention team, transitional housing, shelter, a battering intervention and prevention program, and a legal services team, as well as advocacy.
Great, thank you. And then Amanda?
Hi, I'm Amanda McHenry. I'm with the Poeima Foundation, and we are really big on community awareness, education. We have a safe house as well. We have several campuses that go out and do outreach, sharing posters of missing underage children, and that's like a huge part of our ministry. But we do also have a safe house as well. And I'm also on the executive committee of the C7 Human Trafficking Coalition. And I just want to say, I just think it's awesome that everyone here, including NCTC, are coalition partners. So I think that's really awesome.
Thank you. And then last but not least, Beth.
Hi, I'm Beth Bergeron, and I'm the prevention coordinator for Refuge for Women. We're a long-term faith-based program for victims that have been rescued out of sex trafficking. And we have houses across the country, and we do have a program house in Denton. And I just thank you guys for having this forum and for inviting us.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for taking the time out of your schedule and being available to answer some questions and just let us know some of the resources available in our communities for our students and for the community at large as well. So we're going to start with Beth. I have a question. And so can you tell us just a little bit about how sexual assault and sex trafficking are related to one another, and then how also people may see them separately?
Well, sex trafficking includes and can run the continuum of exploiting somebody for pictures or videos while they're online, all the way to the continuum of selling somebody for a sex act. So in a hotel or a home or online. So the sex act itself is performed under duress, either by force, fraud, or coercion. So trafficking is always sexual assault. It may be with force. It could be by fraud, by promises of a relationship or a job or safety or coercion. So if you don't do this, I'm going to get your little sister, or I'm going to release these pictures that you've already sent. Trafficking so the physical nature of trafficking is always sexual assault, and the woman loses control over what they're doing with her body. Trafficking can be ongoing. So it always overlays with sexual assault. And then I may let the differences, let me let Hillary speak too, I think.
Okay. So one thing that Beth mentioned is that control piece and the coercion piece. And so both of them are about power and control, right? But difference is that sexual assault is not always sex trafficking. And so as she mentioned, trafficking is always a sexual assault. It's not the flip side. And so sexual assault is essentially about power and control, just like domestic violence or just like stalking. And so there was a time in even my life when I remember hearing people say that sexual assault was about sex. And so we now know that that is not at all what it is about, but it is can include anything. It also has that continuum, and so it can be anything from unwanted kissing to rape. And so there are also some types of sexual assault that don't involve physical contact, such as voyeurism or exhibitionism. But when anything is unwanted in a sexual manner, it's considered sexual assault.
And then Amanda, do you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I just wanted to add about that is one thing about sexual assault and sex trafficking is that many of sex trafficking victims already do have a previous sexual assault, that abuse. That's one of the vulnerability factors that we're talking about later. So they have already had that sexual assault previously, even before being trafficked. And then also many of the ones who are trafficked, they may not identify as being trafficked. So then they also may not identify and understand that they themselves have been sex trafficked or have been assaulted, sexually assaulted.
Thanks. And then as far as what actually constitutes consent, Hillary, can you answer that?
Sure. So when we talk about consent in trainings or presentations, we often talk about sort of two different areas of consent. And what I mean by that is what the law says. And so Texas has what we call an age of consent. The age of consent in Texas is 17. And so that means someone who's 17 years old can consent to having sex with someone who is 17 or 19 or 10 years older than them or 20 years older than them if they're 17. If you're under the age of 17 in Texas, there is what we call a 3-year rule. And so a 15-year-old can also have consenting sex with another 15-year-old, but a 15-year-old in Texas could not have sex with a 21-year-old because the 15-year-old is not yet 17, so has not reached the age of consent. So that's sort of our legal definition of consent. But when we're talking about giving consent to someone else, I often talk about it that consent should be awake, consent should be sober, consent should be ongoing, it should be enthusiastic. And so we often hear the term no means no or yes means yes, and certainly yes does mean yes, but consent should be awake, ongoing, sober, and enthusiastic. And it can be given verbally. It can be given with someone checking in, if it is like if there is a physical touch or a nod or something like that. And consent is often necessary in healthy relationships. Not often, it is necessary in healthy relationships. But as relationships go on and the longer folks are in them, people get to know better what the other person is, their consent cues, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And then Ginger, do you have anything to add to kind of either how or what constitutes consent or how it can be given?
I think she covered it really well. I just need, people need to understand that silence is not consent. It's something that's active. It's not something that is just static.
Mm-hmm.
So making sure that both parties are engaged in whatever activity is going on and fully understand what they're doing and are old enough to make those decisions.
Yeah, something that I've done with trainings in the past. How many of you have seen that video about tea and related to consent?
Mm-hmm.
I know we've shown that to students and even in trainings with faculty and staff to really kind of hit home when we're doing our education with our individuals of what that means.
Yeah.
And so that's a powerful video to understand, just because they maybe wanted it last week doesn't mean they necessarily want it this week. And so you speaking to, Hillary, that idea of learning about what consent is for that individual person, sometimes consent can be taken away too, even if it was previously given. So it's really important to have that understanding in that relationship and with that partner.
Jessica, at the end, when you all post this, will you post the link for the tea video?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Definitely.
One thing to that with regard to trafficking, minors can't consent. at all. So in those circumstances, it makes it a little bit more easy for law enforcement to prove that, or they don't have to prove as much on those crimes, because if a victim is trafficked, they cannot say that a minor consented, whether they're 15 or 16.
Great.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification, Beth. As far as can someone explain to me what a SANE exam is and kind of what that is in the realm of sexual assault?
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. So a SANE exam, so SANE stands for Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner or Nurse Exam. And so for Denton County, and Ginger can talk a little bit about this too, but for our county, Friends of the Family coordinates the SANE program. And so in combination with the Children's Advocacy Center. And so Debbie Ridge is the head SANE for Denton County, and then she coordinates the schedules for the other SANE nurses who are on call for Denton County. And what it looks like, Jessica, when someone is sexually assaulted in our community. And also, I should also clarify that a SANE can be done for domestic violence as well. So just FYI. But a lot of times you'll hear a SANE exam in regular language called a rape kit or a rape exam. And so what that constitutes is going to a specific hospital. And so if it's okay with you, I can sort of walk folks through the process. And so typically what happens is when someone is sexually assaulted in our community, they call the police. And the police respond. And if there's not immediate medical attention needed, the police will then gather some information on the scene and call Denton County Friends of the Family's 24-hour crisis line. And they'll call our crisis line and say, hey, I'm Officer so-and-so with such and such police department. We are about to be en route to Medical City, Denton with a 24-year-old victim of sexual assault. She has with her 2 friends, and we will be there in about 45 minutes. Can you please dispatch a SANE and an advocate? And so at that point, our crisis line worker then hangs up and calls the sexual assault nurse who is on call. So the SANE who's on call, and we keep that schedule in our crisis line office that Debbie Ridge sends to us. And so then the crisis line worker will call and dispatch the SANE. They'll give the SANE the police officer's information and phone number, the victim's information, and they will also give the police case number that the police officer has given to the crisis line worker. And they will let the SANE know approximately how long the police officer said that it would take them to get to the hospital. And so if something happens and the SANE on call is in another exam, or something is happening and it's going to be, they said they were going to arrive in 45 minutes and she can't make it there for an hour and a half, she might go ahead and let the crisis line worker know that in case the police officer were to call back. But most of the time she's going to notify the police officer that they will arrive at the hospital before her. And so after that, the crisis line worker hangs up and calls one of the Friends of the Family or Abigails Arms advocates who is on call. And I'll let Ginger speak to the Abigails Arms part in just a moment. And so our advocates are on call 24/7, and they arrive at the hospital with a teddy bear. I always tell people anything you can imagine you might want if your clothes were taken as evidence and you wanted to be clean pretty badly. And so we have toothbrush, toothpaste, sweatpants, teddy bears, and then of course we come with a plethora of information. The goal of the advocate is so that no one is ever at the hospital by themselves, and to let them know that there are resources in the community available for them. And so we never force someone to accept and use our services. If someone does not want the teddy bear, we of course we want to give them as many choices as possible in that moment, because up until this point most of their choices have been taken away. And so the advocate will remain with the survivor in the hospital as long as that survivor wishes them to be there, get them as much information as they can, and try to connect them to Denton County Friends of the Family. And so the SANE exam itself, Jessica, is a collection of evidence, and there is a lot to that. So you're talking, they're going to comb through hair, they're doing fingernail scrapings, they often take urine and blood samples, they'll do saliva swabs, they will take photographs. And so all of those things are done by a certified sexual assault nurse examiner, and those things go into an evidence kit that goes to the police department that is sent off to be processed. And so one of the things people often say is, do I have to make a police report to have a SANE exam? And you do not. In Texas, you can still request a SANE exam without making a police report. But we always want to encourage people to make a police report, because then at some point down the line, if the police report is made, it will, of course, help justice be served, but it is never forced or required.
Mm-hmm. Then Ginger, what do you want to add regarding Abigails Arms?
Our process is much the same. We actually, if you call our 24-hour line, an advocate will be dispatched to the hospital. And you, like she had said, you don't have to file a police report in order to have that exam. So if you call and you tell us that you've been assaulted, we're going to walk you through the steps of what you can do, what your rights are. Our advocates can meet you at the hospital. They're there to support you. They're there to provide you with the information to allow you to make informed choices, and basically hold your hand, make sure your rights are adhered to, and that whatever you need is made accessible to you. Mm-hmm. We have several volunteer advocates that come out. They've been doing this for a while. They're really good with our clients who come in. And then if you choose to make a police report, we can help you navigate that system. If the case goes to trial, the follow-up after that is also providing those advocates to go to court with you, or to go to follow-up appointments, or to law enforcement to make a statement, and make sure that you feel like you're supported and you're believed, and to help you work your way through what's happened to you. Mm-hmm. But for both agencies, I think it's a phone call. You make a phone call and you say, this is what's going on, and then we're going to walk you through allowing you to make choices and work your way through the whole process of what needs to happen from there.
Could either one of you speak to how, because I know I've heard in recent trainings in the past, as far as the SANE exam, how long it takes to process that exam? Can either one of you speak to that?
So it takes anywhere from 6 months to a year to develop a DNA. It's one of the hardest parts of working sexual assault cases for law enforcement, because from the victim's point of view, it often looks like they're not doing anything, when in reality, there's this whole process going on behind the scenes of developing the evidence to help bolster the case. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times we do see victims that as their evidence is finally there, and the law enforcement or the courts are ready to move forward with the case, they're done. They don't want to go back and have to relive that trauma. And every victim has the right to say, I want to press charges, or I don't want to press charges. Mm-hmm. And then we're gonna go with what their wishes are and support them either way that they do that.
Yeah. And so both of your agencies really kind of walk the person through that process, whatever that is, whether it's, hey, I want to pursue something law enforcement wise, or really, I just really kind of want to recover and kind of move on. And both of your agencies will walk them through that path and be available at any time thereafter to assist them.
Yeah, Jessica, for us, one of the things we often tell people that I think is unexpected on a call like that is sometimes they're going to get a hospital bill after the fact. And the exam itself is actually covered through the police department process. And because that will be taken into evidence, it is covered. Mm-hmm. But sometimes they get a bill for the hospital stay or room, and our agencies can help them fill out crime victims compensation, which will cover those costs. Mm-hmm. Another thing I feel like I should mention is there are very specific hospitals that SANEs have visiting rights in for Denton County. And so For us, those there are 4 hospitals typically, and so one of those is Carrollton Regional over off of Josie and Carrollton, and then one of them is Medical City Denton, and then the other one is Medical City Flower Mound, and Medical City Flower Mound is actually a standalone emergency room, and they're currently closed because they have repurposed all of their staff to Medical City Louisville during COVID-19. And so they're not currently open. And then Texas Health Presbyterian in Denton also does, they have SANEs, but they are a little bit different in that they have their own internal sexual assault nurse examiners. And so we don't dispatch the nurses for them, we just dispatch the advocates. The other part that I feel like I should mention is right now, the hospitals for us are not letting the advocates in because of COVID-19. They're not considering them essential personnel at this time. And so the SANEs are working really hard to either help call friends, the family with the survivor in the room, or make sure that we have a good phone number so that the advocate can call and meet with the client over the phone or telehealth.
Okay. Thank you. And then Beth, did you have something to add? No? Okay. No, okay. Thank y'all. And then kind of moving on and switching gears a little bit, what are some societal or cultural issues that can contribute to sexual assault or sex trafficking? So I think Hillary or Beth, do one of y'all want to take that question?
I can speak to what contributes to trafficking, what we feel like the main factors that are fueling the fire with trafficking. There are 4 main factors, and one is the hypersexualization of our culture, and especially at younger ages. The second one is the use and the availability of pornography, which portrays typically, often, most times, violence against women and dehumanizes women. So when younger people see that and it becomes more normalized to them, that might be expectations for what's in their future. It definitely dehumanizes women and takes that piece away. Online content of porn, last year, the tech companies reported like over 45 million photos and videos of children in abuse situations, and that more than doubled what they found the previous year. So there's demand content online for sure that we know, and there's no doubt that that leads more to the increase in online solicitation of minors and trafficking. Definitely the accessibility of those kids. Even 10 years ago, 15-year-olds would have phones, maybe 10-year-olds didn't, but they all do now, and most all of them have online accounts. And then, of course, drugs and alcohol. The drugs and alcohol are used to lure victims and to keep them under their control. So dually beforehand with trying to recruit for trafficking, but also to keep them under their control with trafficking. And that can be different for sexual assault. So sorry, Hillary, let you speak to that.
Yeah, so some things do overlap in the things that Beth said, but for sexual assault, we talk a lot about rape culture and the things that contribute to that. And so, of course, some of the things that Beth mentioned do contribute to rape culture. And when we talk about that, it can encompass a lot of different things, anything from advertising to how romance and sex are portrayed in movies and books and music. Online content for lots of things that people post, things that people say can contribute in a way to sexual assault. And what we mean by that is when things are painted in a way or portrayed in a specific way that set an expectation for anyone, and then reality is much different from what those things look like, it can be very jarring for people. And so when something is portrayed very romanticized, so one of the things we talk a lot about is stalking is something that is often romanticized in song and movies or TV. And in real life, if someone did those things, it would be terrifying. and it becomes like, oh, it's very cute, or it's sweet, or this type of jealousy means that this person cares about me, and I imagine that like a lot of that online attention is very similar. Like people believe that it means that these folks care about them, and so we talk a lot about like other contributing factors. And when rape culture, there's some great information out there. So Jackson Katz is a phenomenal speaker about rape culture, as well as Jean Kilbourne, and they both have really neat films that talk about how over time women's bodies are portrayed smaller, weaker, and more waifish in movies, media, advertising, and men's bodies are portrayed bigger, more muscular, and tougher. And so as women are sort of being erased out of the picture, men are taking up more and more space. And those things are just two examples of ways that advertising and media can contribute to rape culture.
And then Ginger, do you want to speak towards children and kind of what, for certain populations, for children, obviously there are different issue and different things happen within them. Can you speak to that?
Well, going along with what Hillary and Beth were saying, the children are seeing more and more violence and sex on TV and the games that they play, and it becomes normal. It doesn't jar them. It doesn't make them go, ooh, I would never want that to happen to me, because it's become normal for them. So then when they find themselves in those situations, they have no frame of reference to understand that it's not okay for that to happen. Looking at children who are living in violence or who are traumatized as a child, it changes the way their brain processes the trauma that's happened to them, and it changes their coping skills with how they deal with those things. So a lot of times what we see is some of the adults who are coming in for services who were victimized as a child, they don't have those healthy relationships and healthy boundaries and healthy coping skills. And they find themselves, through no fault of their own, in situations that become very violent very quickly. And then they're left standing there going, I don't know what to do with this, because here I am again, and I don't know how I got here. So understanding that, especially children who are victimized, it's not that they're seeking unhealthy relationships. It's not that they're seeking violence. It's that they don't know any different. Mm-hmm. So they end up being in those situations that they're not equipped to handle.
Thank you. And then
can I add one more thing, Jessica?
Yeah,
we are seeing with children too, like all the we serve adults, but almost all of the ladies were trafficked when they were younger than 18, when they were minors, was when it started. And the average age of into forced prostitution is 13 years old.
Wow.
So when we see, it used to be an outlier when we would see trafficking within the family, but we're seeing that more and more in economic downturn with stress and violence and drug abuse in the family. They will traffic those children. So, and still send them to school during the day. So that's just one more piece of that abuse that Ginger was talking about, that may be chronic for them, and they end up kind of with maladaptive coping techniques as adults.
Thank you for adding that. Kind of switching gears just a little bit, as far as, who are the most vulnerable kind of to sexual exploitation and or trafficking? Can, I guess Beth or Amanda, can you speak to that?
I know there's a lot of things that make a lot of vulnerabilities out there. And age, of course, is a big one, because the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until 25, so that's a decision-making part of the brain. So that's a huge factor. I mean, dysfunctional families, although everyone does seem to have that on some level. Foster children and homeless, they're at a really high risk for being exploited. Mental illness also can play a big factor, because, there's not always that capability to make the best decisions as well. And I think Beth already did mention it, the drug use is really a big one within the family. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, in some cases, it's the parents are addicted to drugs. So they don't really take care of the children in the way they need to be, or the young people in the family, but they may end up selling their children to fund their drug habit. So that happens as well. And as she mentioned, with families. And history of trauma and abuse is a really big one, because what we find is that most trafficking victims have been abused. And there's a district attorney in Nashville that all the women that he had worked with, they had all been sexually abused before they had ended up being trafficked.
Beth, do you want to add anything?
Well, traffickers often prey on people that are hungry for attention too. So that includes almost everybody across walks of life at some time in their life. They can promise a hope of a better life or a better employment opportunities. They make promises for shelter or safety. They can turn, somebody that needs a stable home. They can offer up services that the people need. So the characteristics can be present across all ages, socioeconomic statuses, nationality, and education levels. So we know from statistics of people in our recovery programs, those are definitely, Amanda has a perfect list of our most vulnerable populations, but every day we're seeing still out of trafficking and sexual exploitation coming out of normal neighborhoods, normal families with no risk factors also. So just a caveat to think about, well, it won't happen to us is never going to be able to be something that's said.
Do you see any comorbidity as far as abuse? I mean, you both mentioned prior sexual abuse, but whether it be physical violence or emotional, mental, abuse, is that something that individuals that you worked with have mentioned as well from past either family dynamics or family relationships?
Yes, absolutely. They're usually all, like Amanda said, have a history of sexual abuse. And 90% of the women that we treat have a substance abuse disorder by the time that they get to us. And of course, with trafficking, there's always violence. So.
And I will just kind of add, related to sexual assault, that most sexual assaults are committed by someone that the person knows. And so there is often that overlap of intimate partner violence and sexual assault, or at least an acquaintance. And so I think the stat for college age students, since that's your area of expertise, is 62% of them are sexually assaulted by an intimate partner. And then 17% are assaulted by an acquaintance.
Yeah.
Can I mention something, since the mention with the college age students is one thing that we've kind of looking at more these days too, is also with sugar daddies and sugar mamas, that there's a lot of vulnerability there, because you don't really know these people who are offering to take care of all your needs. And that's a big factor too, is just feeling financially dependent and stressed out about how am I going to pay my college tuition, how am I going to eat, all that kind of stuff. It leaves people really vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I just would caution about the sugar daddies and having that as an option.
Do any of you have any red flags that you've seen working with clients or individuals in your agencies, as far as kind of a repetition of, whether it be a sugar daddy or offering to pay for all these things? Is there a commonality there that you've seen across the board, either with sexual assault and or trafficking, that people have been told or believed and that kind of went down that path?
Well, with trafficking, they'll lie to fill any need that you have. So if you need shelter, they'll get you shelter. If you're lonely, they'll be your friend. So if you need a job, they'll promise a modeling opportunity. There was even a victim who modeled for 2 months in what seemed to be a normal modeling opportunity, and then went in for a shoot one night and was raped and videotaped. And then that was used to exploit her to continue in the life. So the red flags that we see are like somebody new into their life with promises of something that seems too good to be true. Always, typically the introduction of greater level of drugs and alcohol, especially addictive ones, and isolation from their friends and family, separating those, kind of distancing them from anybody that might be able to pull them back and recover them. Amanda, do you have anything else?
I was thinking about things like maybe even just all of a sudden they just change how they look. They start dressing a little more promiscuous, things like that. Maybe they have multiple cell phones or things that they can't afford, but all of a sudden they seem to be able to afford these nice things, nice purses.
In the beginning stages of the grooming, it's typically statistically a boyfriend or romantic partner or somebody as posting as a benefactor. So they will buy them things for sure. Do the hair, do the makeup, do the nails, those kind of things, clothes, gifts, expensive gifts, and always the cell phones, like Amanda said. And it's at that point that it seems too good to be true, because they're treating them wonderfully and kind of wooing them into a life. And so at that point, that looks completely different than end or middle or end trafficking, which looks more desolate, of course.
Thank you both. I'm going to switch gears just a minute and kind of touch on two different other populations that maybe don't get as much information and awareness during this month, but that would be males and then our LGBTQ community. And so I think everybody is going to kind of chime in on this one. So Ginger, will you kind of start us off?
Yeah, I just think understanding that anyone, whether it's male, female, LGBTQ, children, adults, any socioeconomic group, anyone can become a victim. And it's understanding that for some people, it is harder to speak up, and they need those advocates and those supporters to help them move forward. For men especially, there is still this cultural belief that you are the stronger person and surely you couldn't be raped, but it happens. And understanding not only the dynamic that they were forced to do something they didn't want to do, but they also have this added layer of they shouldn't speak about it, the shame that comes along with it. So just understanding that it can happen to anybody, and being supportive of whoever it is, no matter what they're making their outcry of, and understanding that they need to be believed.
Beth, do you have something to add?
In trafficking, we see about 1 in 10, 90% are victims are women and 10% are men. We do know it's, like Ginger said, it's highly underreported. They're less likely to seek resources and admit what happened. More common to happen in the foster system with homeless or runaways. They're more likely to engage in survival sex, which means they're using the sex to trade for shelter, for food, for drugs, or just everyday survival. Any community that's marginalized, and so sometimes we see that with the LGBTQ or somebody that has lack of immigration status. If somebody's marginalized, there's less likely to be able to seek those resources. Or if they don't have English as their first language, might be less likely to seek resources or feel under more of that control, like we talked about earlier, because they can't stand up for themselves. Sometimes there's lack of family support in those communities. And again, the gender bias that they should have not been in those circumstances. So that's really hard. We really want to reach out to that group and help them. Amanda, what did you have?
I mean, I'm glad that there actually is starting to be a lot more focus on these groups and on males. I, read up about that. There was a report. Sorry, my mind went blank. But there was a report recently that talked about how males, they don't, like it's been mentioned, they don't really identify. There's not as many services, but they do acknowledge that they do comprise a significant portion of those who've been trafficked. And so the numbers probably are very skewed. There's a home in Florida that's been open for boys. And fortunately here locally, Ranch Hand Rescue is opening a home for boys who have been trafficked. So that's a really awesome resource that we're going to have. And so I'm glad that there's just more focus, and we are going to start. Hopefully that means more males may be able to feel more comfortable even speaking up, if we can try to get rid of that stigma.
Taylor, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, speaking to men who have been sexually assaulted, a lot of it is also about rape culture and shame.
Yeah.
There's this culture that we've created where men are supposed to be strong and tough and not vulnerable, and that they can't be hurt. And because of that, there's a lot of shame when someone who is sexually assaulted needs to come forward or wants to come forward. And then related to the LGBTQI plus community, I think it is, the numbers don't show us that it happens any less in queer communities than it does for folks who don't identify as queer. And so I think there is a stigma that, like, oh, well, because this person identifies in this way, they're going to be less likely to be sexually assaulted, and that's totally untrue. It is the numbers are almost identical.
Mhm. And when I think we briefly mentioned this, but I'll kind of pose this again. How does social media play into sexual assault and then sex trafficking? And I think, Ginger, you were going to kind of tackle more of the sexual assault. What have you seen through your agency as far as what individuals are saying regarding social media through that process before or after?
Yeah, social media and games that people are playing and connecting with others instead of someone next door or someone in your school or someone in a club that you're in or a camp that you go to being the one who is causing the trauma. With social media and game apps, they're meeting people all over the world. And these people are giving these children and even adults attention. And so I saw an interview, and they talked about, if somebody came to your door, an adult came to your door and knocked on it and said, hey, I want to come in and visit with your 10-year-old boy or girl, you're probably going to look at them and slam the door and go, no, maybe even call the police. But by the same token, you're allowing that same adult free access to your child, or for adults who play games, you're giving other people free access to your life. You're disclosing a lot of things, and you're allowing these total strangers into your life. And the caveat of you don't let somebody punch you on the first date, but when you start grooming someone, it's like we talked about. It's a honeymoon. You're being treated really well. You're being given a lot of attention. Sometimes you're being given things, and they lure you in and they groom you with this false sense of happiness and pleasure and security. And then the next thing you know, you're in a situation that you can't get out of.
Mm-hmm.
So really understanding that you're opening yourself up to a lot of situations that may not be safe.
Mm-hmm. And then, Beth, do you want to speak towards the sex trafficking?
Well, we knew our pre-COVID numbers were that 70% of trafficking starts online.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty disturbing. You might be familiar, and I want to share a social experiment that Bark did. Bark is a social media monitoring app, and they created an fake online personas for fictitious teens. And their 11-year-old persona, who was named Bailey, was contacted by 52 men in a week, with most of the messages and requests being explicitly sexual in nature. When we do prevention training and I ask the high school kids if they've been contacted by somebody online, they don't know. Every one of them raises their hand. And there's usually one or two that will disclose that will come to tell me, not even all the ones that don't tell me, that they have shared pictures online. Mm-hmm. So those online relationships, they befriend them. They seem to be in their corner. They might provide like in-gaming, favors inside games and stuff like that. But a lot of flattery. You should be a model. And those kind of things. They befriend them and then ask for pictures and videos. And they're, a 30-year-old manipulating 11-year-old mind or a 12-year-old mind. And so once they have any videos or pictures, then the exploitation continue from there. They often request to meet them in person, or demand that, or exploit them, saying they're going to share the pictures with their parents or their church group if they don't send them more. Mm-hmm. So online is the number one way that recruiters are using for trafficking right now. And like I said, that was pre-COVID numbers.
Yeah, I know recently there was a big concern as far as with domestic violence and obviously with sexual assault, sex trafficking, the numbers increasing during this time of isolation. Have each of your agencies kind of seen that or experienced either call volume or concerns related to that?
Jessica, Friends of the Family, our intake numbers really haven't slowed down. And so even though those are being done either like telecommunication or video, they haven't slowed down. And then our crisis line, basically like end of March through the first couple of weeks of April, our crisis line saw a 36% increase in phone calls. And so we, of course, imagine that that's due to that isolation piece. We also have created where now folks can text our crisis line if they are, quarantined in a space with their abuser and can't call in a safe way. They can now text our crisis line and speak to a crisis line worker.
For us, I know our numbers, like Denton's, have been pretty steady. We've seen a slight increase this week as some of the restrictions, number one, some of the restrictions are being laxed, but also the fact that people are getting to a point where they have to reach out. For our Child Advocacy Center, when we look at the statewide intake reporting to DFPS, predominantly is teachers. Over half of the people who report child abuse are teachers. And now those teachers don't have physical access to those children. So the statewide intake numbers are down, but on the flip side of that, our forensic interviewers have actually done more forensic interviews in this last month than normal. So when we look at what's going to happen when school starts in the fall, what's going to happen when families start getting out and children go back to daycare, and then we discover that the whole situation that's been going on, creating extra stress in the family, has put these women, these children, these men in a position of more vulnerability than normal and a lack of ability to get out and get help.
Well, and something else when y'all were talking earlier, it made me think of a policy. And sorry, the sun is going down, so you're going to kind of see lines on my face. But as far as like policies or state legislation that is either in place or that could be changing in their future to help these populations and these individuals, can someone speak to that?
I think there are several coalitions that really do focus on the gaps in the services and the help that's provided to victims. So they're ever changing. They're always moving to improve the ability for agencies like ours to be able to provide those services to the victims in ever increasing ways for the victims to be able to reach out. I know texting to the hotline is big right now as an ease of access for a victim to just real quickly be able to shoot off a text message and reach out to somebody.
Anybody else want to add to that? Okay, moving on. So as far as, for those that have experienced sexual assault themselves or know somebody that has, what kind of advice or resources would you offer them? And then I think it's Hillary and Beth on this question.
So I think for someone who has experienced sexual assault, one of the things I think it's important to know is lots of agencies like Friends of the Family or Abigails Arms are available for them no matter when the sexual assault was. And so sometimes people think, oh, this happened to me 3 years ago, or this happened to me when I was a kid. And so it's too late for me to get help, or it's too late for me to seek services. And most agencies certainly will see people who have had a sexual assault that wasn't recent. And so I think that's important. Another thing is to, if it's you who's experienced it and you're wanting to report to the police or have a SANE exam done, that there are agencies that will walk with you, like you said earlier, Jessica, just every step of the way, and that those things are important. And of course, texting the crisis line. Sometimes people just have questions about feeling, maybe a sexual assault hasn't happened yet, but they feel that pressure coming from a partner and they want to ask questions about that. Text a crisis line. Our crisis line number is 940-382-7273. And so being able to text instead of having to call sometimes can eliminate a barrier.
Mhm.
And then related to if you know someone who has been sexually assaulted, I think the first thing you can do is start by believing them. And I noticed that some of you have your shirts on that say, I believe you. And so well done. And I think that is the key, really. When someone tells you that they've been assaulted, you believe them. You don't then jump into like, I'm Olivia Benson, SVU, I must solve this crime immediately. What you do is believe them. I think some of the greatest things that you can do are tell them how courageous they were to tell you that it must have been really hard. You can say that you're sorry that happened to them if that feels comfortable. I think, sharing with people that you don't believe that they deserved that to happen to them. Non-judgmental things, it is not that.
Oh no, she's frozen. Okay, we're gonna pause on Hillary. Oh, there she is. You froze for 2 seconds, so.
I did?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Today is National Denim Day. And so I think the days of asking what someone was wearing when they were sexually assaulted are over. Denim Day is actually celebrated as an awareness during sexual assault month around the world. And so if you want more information about that, you should definitely check out the Friends of the Family Facebook page, or the Denim Day website has the history about that. But I think the key is if someone discloses to you, ask them if they want to seek help, or they want to call the police, or they want to call an agency like Friends of the Family, or do they want to go to the counselor at NCTC, and ask them if they want you to go with them. Do they want you to help make a report? The key is to be non-judgmental, to not criticize, and to not advice give, just to be a listening, open ear.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh,
Beth, do you
mhm.
have anything to add to that?
Well, trafficking victims are less likely to self-report because they very well may not realize that it's happening to them, because they think they might be in a relationship with a boyfriend and they just are a little short on money, or a lot of different circumstances with power and control that they don't realize they're being trafficked. So really, the number one way that victims are recovered from trafficking or near trafficking is interaction with friends and family. And we know that from PolarisProject.org, who keeps all our statistics. So really, it's us seeing the community, seeing our friends, seeing our family, seeing our friends' friends, with new stuff, and having those hard conversations about, hey, who bought you that purse, or where'd you get that, or where are you sleeping? Have you ever had to trade sex for safety or shelter or food? Or those kind of hard questions, and just go out there and ask them, and be the eyes and ears of the community. With reporting, there's the hotline, of course. The number is 888-3737-888. And you can also text to be free. Mm-hmm. And so those are even for questions also. If people have maybe a possible scenario, they saw something that was a little suspicious and they want to call it in. So Polaris collects all those data points and then can reach out to local authorities as needed. So they're filtering through those and connecting those data points. So it's important to ask those questions, mm-hmm. to report anything that you might see if you have a friend that might be in trouble, and also to educate people that don't know what trafficking looks like, so that they can be more aware that it could be somebody that's still being sold to 2 or 3 customers at night, but still attending school during the day.
Yeah. Recently, I'm a counselor. I told y'all that beforehand, and I had to do some CEU. So I did one on sex trafficking related to coming in for medical exams. So typically sex trafficked individuals come in because something's injured or something's wrong, whether it be a UTI or something's going on, and how the medical community is really working to identify and ask a lot of questions in a safe environment so people can self-disclose in that medical setting. So it's very interesting to read that information and kind of what the medical community is doing. But I think also a community as general, it's hard to ask questions because sometimes we're like, am I going to open the can and then what do I do with that? But I think, you know, what each of you provide are resources and kind of the ability to ask questions and get information, because we don't always have the answers, and we may not have the skill set to help individuals, but we may know somebody, or there's information out there to then help them, or at least give them, and they can help themselves. So you know, I really appreciate each of you taking the time. We're almost done. Does anybody have a kind of go around? Does anybody have any kind of last minute things they want to say, either about something that we mentioned today, something that wasn't mentioned, or about your agency in general?
I think for us, just knowing that you can call, whether you are the victim or you know someone, you can call and talk to any one of our agencies and talk through what your options are, what your rights are, and the remedies that are available to you to help you or to help your friend or family member figure out what their next step needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
I agree that we have to stand up and be there and say something for these individuals and help them navigate what's really a post-trauma experience. And so if it's somebody else calling and say, this is what's happened, what do we do next? Mm-hmm. Or what are the resources, or those kind of questions, just to really see people in our community and the humanity behind where they are, and not see people in a negative light, a bias with prostitution, or with their life choices, because none of that matters. If they're in a post-trauma experience, that we can come around them as a community with all our agencies and help them.
Mm-hmm. Amanda or Hillary, anything that you want to add?
I think you guys all said it really well. I do think the awareness is such a big key, and just, you know, being able to willingly or personally engage with people who may be struggling, because I think we all probably have some level of trauma that we've dealt with, and being able to just be empathetic to other people and just open our eyes and be willing to actually get involved.
Mm-hmm. Hillary, you got anything?
I kind of said my piece before you asked the question. So
well, I appreciate each of you. As far as NCTC, I just want to let students in our community know that we have all of these resources available on our website. So if you need something, on the back of our shirts, you can't see them, but it says NCTC cares, because we do care. And so if you are experiencing something currently, or you have questions, please reach out to us as well. We are a resource for you. Whether you're a student or not a student, I mean, we're here to help. There's many of us that are counselors and have walked through individuals through the process or getting assistance and help. So just know that we care. We will have all this information available on a slide, so you can see how to contact each of these agencies and in those areas. And then also for us, awareness.nctc.edu is kind of where we've put all of our Sexual Assault Awareness Month content. Next week, I'll plug Amanda with Poeima. She's going to be doing a sex trafficking 101. Zoom, Facebook Live training. So if you're interested in kind of knowing more about what that is and what that looks like, please tune in next week for that. But I definitely appreciate each of you. And I really enjoyed moderating. I think I was a little nervous. So thank y'all so much for kind of putting me at ease and being able to participate today. And I hope we kind of get to do it again soon, and just keep updating and kind of figuring out how we can best serve our communities. So thank y'all so much. And it's been a great evening, and y'all have a great day.
Thank you.
bye.